The thermos was old, dented on one side, scratched on the other, painted in a faded green that had once been bright. Ambassador Yara Osei had carried it to every session of the Galactic Council for 11 years. It had been her mother's. It held tea that had gone lukewarm before she ever got to drink it. She set it on the desk in front of her, opened her portfolio, and looked at the voting projections she had already memorized the night before. The numbers were not going to change. The Grand Chamber of the Harmony Council was enormous. It had been built 600 years ago by architects who believed that a big enough room could make any disagreement feel small. The ceiling stretched so high that the top of it disappeared into a soft manufactured light. 47 species sat in curved rows around the central floor. Their translators hummed. Their delegates shifted and whispered and adjusted robes and breathing masks and the various things different kinds of bodies needed to sit still for long hours. Yara had been sitting in this room for 11 years. She knew where the drafts came from. She knew which delegates fell asleep during the long procedural readings, and which ones pretended not to. She knew that the Keth representative always arrived 7 minutes late, and always looked embarrassed about it. She knew today that none of that would matter. Councillor Sevorath of the Velhari rose to speak. The Velhari were tall, pale-skinned, and had the kind of faces that looked carved rather than grown. Sevorath had been on the council for 200 years. Their voice was smooth and unhurried, like water running over something it had been running over for a very long time. Resolution 7 Gamma 9, Sevorath began, represents an evolution, not a disruption, not a reassignment, an evolution of what the Harmony Accords were always meant to become. The resolution was 40 pages long. It said, in the language that diplomats use when they do not want to say a thing plainly, that the military ships and stations that humanity had built and crewed and paid for over 200 years would now belong to the Council. The Council could use them. The Council could send them where it wanted, without asking. Sevorath called this solidarity. Yara looked at her thermos. She had read the resolution 17 times. Each time she read it, she thought of a different word for what it was. Not one of those words was solidarity. Sevorath continued for 20 minutes. The speech was genuinely beautiful. It talked about the dream of harmony. It talked about how civilization was only real if it was shared. It talked about how the species that gave the most had always been the ones most honored in history. There was a part near the end that almost made the Keth delegate cry. Yara had written a response. She had it in her portfolio. 4 pages, sourced, measured, precise. She had spent 3 nights on it. She closed the portfolio. The vote was called. It moved through the chamber in the standard order, species by species, delegate by delegate. Yara listened to each one. Yes, 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 abstain, yes, yes, abstain, yes. The 9 human votes were no, 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 no. It passed 38-9. The chamber recorded the result. A clerk read it aloud for the official transcript. Sevorath nodded, slowly, with the expression of someone who had expected this, and was still pleased. Several delegates began gathering their things. Someone in the back rows was already pulling up the next item on the session agenda. Yara sat still for a moment. The thermos was in front of her. She looked at it the way you look at something when you are trying to remember it. The dent on the left side, the scratch across the lid, the way the green paint had worn thin at the handle. She picked up her portfolio. She opened it to a page she had not shown anyone, had not mentioned to anyone, had prepared alone in her office at 3 a.m, 6 weeks ago, because she had known, even then, that this moment was coming. She stood. She walked to the central floor. Her footsteps were the only sound. Every translator in the room was running. Every delegate was watching. Sevorath turned their long, pale face toward her, with an expression that was polite and patient and completely certain she was about to make a formal objection that would be noted and filed and change nothing. Yara placed the document on the floor of the chamber with both hands, flat, deliberate, the way you set down something you have been carrying for a long time. The Terran delegation formally invokes Article 14, Section 3 of the Harmony Accords. She said it clearly. No drama in her voice, just the sentence. The chamber went quiet in the specific way that a room goes quiet when something has happened that no one has a response prepared for. One of the council translators stopped working entirely. Another delegate leaned over and said something to a third. A young aide near the back wall pulled up the text of the Accords on a screen and started scrolling. Fast. Article 14, Section 3 was the withdrawal clause. It had been written 600 years ago by people who believed it would never be used. It was the kind of thing you put in a document to show good faith, to show that membership was voluntary, to show that no one was trapped. It was ceremony. It was a door that was never supposed to open, because no species had ever actually wanted to leave. The words were simple, formal, very old. They said that any member species could, by official declaration before the full council, initiate a 90-day disengagement from all harmony frameworks, treaties, and obligations. At the end of 90 days, that species would be fully and completely free of the compact. As of this session, Yara said, humanity initiates a 90-day disengagement from all harmony frameworks, treaties, and collective obligations. She picked up her portfolio. She walked back to her desk. She picked up her thermos. She walked toward the chamber doors. The doors opened automatically, the way they always did, because they were built to open for any delegate at any time. That had seemed like a courtesy for 11 years. Now, it seemed like the most useful thing the chamber had ever done for her. She did not look back. Behind her, the room began to find its voice again. Sevoras said something. Yara did not hear what. The doors closed. The corridor outside was empty and bright, and smelled like the recycled air that every space station smelled like. A little flat, a little cold, with nothing in it that had ever grown. Yara walked down it. Her footsteps were steady. She got 20 meters before she realized she was still holding the thermos. She had meant to drink the tea. She had not drunk it. The tea was cold now. It had been cold for an hour. She had left everything else at the desk. The portfolio pages, the water glass, the small framed photo of the Accra coastline she had kept there for 11 years. She had only taken the thermos. She stood in the corridor for a moment, just breathing. Then she kept walking. Fleet Admiral Dio Reyes had a habit of counting ceiling tiles. He had done it in briefing rooms for 30 years. It was not something he chose to do. It was something his eyes did, when the information in the room became too much to hold in a straight line. The ceiling tiles in the Terran Strategic Office on Meridian Station were plain white squares, 11 across, 8 down. He had counted them 11 times in the past 2 hours. The briefing was not going well. Not because the news was bad. The news was, in a technical sense, entirely expected. What was not expected was the size of it. What was not expected was that when you laid all the information out on a table, all the contracts, all the maintenance agreements, all the service records, all the supply routes, all the database access agreements, all the research partnerships, all the patrol arrangements, the number you arrived at was so large that the analyst presenting it had stopped twice to recheck her own work. "Say it again," Reyes said. The analyst, a small, tired woman named Dr. Chidi, who had not slept in 30 hours, looked at her screen. 34% of Harmony's critical infrastructure is currently maintained, operated, or dependent on Terran personnel or Terran-built systems. 34. Yes, sir. Reyes looked at the ceiling. 11 tiles. And they have 9 of 47 votes, he said. It was not a question. 9 of 47, she confirmed. He thought about that for a moment. 9 votes out of 47. Less than 20% of the voice. More than a third of the weight. He had known in a general way that humans worked hard inside Harmony. He had known they showed up. He had not understood, until this moment, that showing up for 200 years inside a system that was not built for you meant that you ended up holding pieces of it that nobody had thought to count. The withdrawal clock had started 11 days ago. 79 days remained. The work was already underway. That was the part that surprised people who had expected grief or anger, or at least some visible sign of turmoil. There was none. In every Harmony station, on every shared facility, in every joint project that bore both the council seal and a human signature, human personnel were doing exactly what they had always done, with one addition. They were documenting everything they did. Every process, every system, every repair schedule, every override code, writing it down in clear language, leaving it for whoever would come after. Clean, Yara had said, in the single message she had sent to department heads on the first day. We leave clean. She had not elaborated. She did not need to. On the jump gate relay station above Vera 7, a human engineer named Cass spent 14 hours writing a maintenance manual for a cooling system she had been running on improvised solutions for 3 years, because the Harmony supply chain kept sending the wrong parts. She wrote down every improvisation. She drew diagrams. She labeled everything in 3 languages. When she was done, she sat and ate her dinner and looked at the manual and thought that it was probably the best thing she had ever written, and that whoever took over would probably not understand half of it for at least a year. She submitted it anyway, packed her toolkit, went to bed. On Harmony Station 12, a team of 8 human medical researchers finished transferring their data on the Gren fever strain to the joint database. The last entry contained a note, written by the team's senior researcher. This treatment protocol requires synthesis equipment only currently available through Terran medical suppliers. Recommend sourcing alternatives before end of transfer period. The note was filed. Nobody read it yet. Day 47. Reyes was in his office when the report came in. It was 2 paragraphs. A Velhari hospital ship, the Sorrow of Omoth, had transmitted an emergency distress signal to the nearest Harmony medical relay. A rare degenerative condition had presented in 17 passengers simultaneously, a known phenomenon in long-haul Velhari travelers. The standard treatment required a synthesized compound. It had a production chain that was 7 steps long, and had been entirely run by human biochemists based out of a lab on Station 41. Station 41 had completed its transfer process on day 43. The lab equipment was already in transit back to Terran space. Under the Harmony medical emergency protocols, standard response time was 6 hours. The Harmony medical relay had contacted 4 alternative suppliers. None of them produced the compound at the required purity. 2 of them had never heard of it. One had produced it once 9 years ago under a joint contract with the Station 41 lab, and had not maintained the process afterward. Estimated time to treatment? Unknown. Reyes read the report, set it on his desk. He did not pick it up again. He looked at it for a while, the way you look at a thing you knew was going to happen, and feel no satisfaction at having known. Well, he said, there it is. His aide, standing in the doorway, asked if he wanted to send a response. Reyes thought about it. Humanity was no longer under Harmony obligation. This was not his crisis to manage. This was not his ship to rescue. Everything he had spent the past 47 days doing had been precisely so that he was no longer responsible for things like this. Send them the contact for the Station 41 team leader, he said. She's still in transit. She'll know if there's a workaround. He paused. Don't send it through council channels. Send it directly. His aide nodded and left. Reyes looked at the ceiling. 11 tiles. Always 11. He was not angry. That was the thing that surprised even him. He had expected to feel something fierce when the pieces started falling, when Harmony began to feel the actual weight of what it had casually voted to take. He had expected satisfaction, or grief, or the particular exhaustion that comes after a long fight finally ends. What he felt instead was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Tired the way a structure gets tired. Not broken, just done holding a shape it had been holding for too long. In the council chamber, Sev Orath called an emergency session. The official language described the situation as a temporary disruption in service continuity during a period of compact evolution. The resolution passed to form a working group. The working group would assess current infrastructure dependencies and recommend mitigation strategies within 30 days. 30 days. The human engineers, doctors, and researchers who had been running those systems had needed, on average, 3 to 5 years of training to do it. The working group had 30 days. Reyes received the council session summary that evening, and read it the way you read something that proves a thing you did not want to be proven. He set it down next to the hospital ship report. 2 pieces of paper, sitting next to each other, not talking, not needing to. He counted the ceiling tiles one more time. 11. He turned the light off and went home. Day 91. Nobody came back. That was the part that the council had not fully believed until the morning it happened. Right up until the end of the countdown, there had been a working assumption, not spoken aloud, not written into any document, but present in the room the way an unspoken assumption always is, that humanity would return. That the 90 days were theater, a demonstration of feeling, a way of making a point that would eventually conclude with a renegotiated position and a new agreement and perhaps a formal apology entered into the record. The countdown ended on a Tuesday. The 9 seats in the Grand Chamber stayed empty. There was no message, no statement, no last-minute delegation arriving at the doors. The Terran diplomatic offices in Harmony Space had been packed and vacated on day 88. The forwarding address for official correspondence was a relay code that connected to an automated receipt system. The automated system confirmed delivery. That was all it did. Sevorath called the session to order. The chamber was full, 46 species, every seat taken, but the 9 empty chairs made it feel hollow in a way that had nothing to do with the number of people present. Someone had placed the standard water glasses at those seats out of habit. The glasses sat there, full, untouched, over the course of the 6-hour session. By the end, the ice in them had melted. The session was supposed to address the infrastructure crisis. It did, in the way that large formal bodies address crises, with the creation of additional committees, the drafting of additional language, the passing of resolutions that describe the problem in very precise terms, and committed to the development of solutions that would be identified and implemented within a timeline to be determined. The jump gate relay above the Tauran colony world had been running at 60% capacity for 12 days. The Tauran delegate reported this. The jump gate above the Sethrani trade route had been shut down entirely after a calibration failure that the human maintenance team, now gone, had been preventing for 4 years through a manual adjustment they had never documented because it had never occurred to them that they would not be there to keep doing it. The Sethrani delegate reported this. Another committee was assigned. The Famine Prevention Program on Outer Reach 7 had been built on a seed variety database that was co-maintained by a human agricultural research team. The database still existed. The access permissions still worked. The problem was that the database needed quarterly updates based on new soil data from Outer Reach 7, and the humans who had been doing the data analysis had been doing it as part of a broader research partnership that no longer existed, and the raw soil data was now sitting in a queue that fed into a processing algorithm that ran on servers that were no longer connected to the network because those servers were on a station that had completed its transfer process on day 71. The Outer Reach delegate reported this. A third committee was assigned. Sev Orath listened to each report in full. Their expression did not change. The Velhari had very still faces when they were thinking hard, the way still water hides how deep it goes. They kept the original withdrawal document on the desk in front of them throughout the session. They had been keeping it there every day since day 1. Voluntary cessation of compact obligations. They had read the phrase so many times that the words had stopped looking like words and had started looking like shapes. They kept trying to find the part they had missed, the conditional, the exception, the clause that made this a temporary state rather than a permanent one. The architects of the Accords had been careful people, thoughtful people. They had included Article 14 because they believed in the principle of voluntary membership. They had not included a reinstatement clause because they had not thought they needed one. Sevorat sat with that. The session ended, the chamber cleared, the water glasses were collected by the staff. The 9 empty chairs remained. Sevorath stayed in the chamber alone for a while. On the other side of Harmony Space, a small encrypted message arrived at the Terran diplomatic relay. It was not sent through council channels. It was sent from a private address registered to the Keth trade delegation. The Keth were a small species. 4 billion people across 2 worlds, no military fleet, a modest economy, a long history of staying quiet in rooms full of louder voices. They had voted for Resolution 7 Gamma 9. The message was addressed to Ambassador Osei directly. It had taken the sender 17 attempts to write it. The final version was 4 sentences. We did not know. We were told it was a formality. We were told you would accept. We did not know what you were. Reyes received it first. Yara was in a meeting. He read it twice, standing at his desk with his coffee getting cold in his hand. He thought about what to say to her when he forwarded it. He did not think of anything that felt right. He forwarded it, without a note. Yara read it at her desk at 9:30 that evening. She read it 3 times. The room was quiet. Her thermos was in the corner of the desk. She looked at the message for a long time, the way you look at something that is not a surprise, and still takes the air out of the room. We did not know what you were. She typed 1 word back, noted, and for the first time in 30 years of using that word, she meant it not as a weapon. She meant it the way it was supposed to mean. I have received this. I have heard it. I am holding it somewhere. It will not be lost. Back in the chamber, the council met in a closed session to discuss a formal request for negotiation. The summary that was eventually released described it as a productive discussion about the path toward renewed compact stability. What the summary did not describe was the 40 minutes before the vote, when no one spoke. When delegate after delegate sat in their seats and looked at the 9 empty chairs, and the 9 full water glasses, and the ceiling of the great room that had been built to make disagreements feel small. The vote to formally request negotiation with the Terran delegation passed 44-0. Even Sevorath voted yes, especially Sevorath. They left the withdrawal document on the desk when they walked out. They had been rereading it every day for 91 days. They did not need to reread it anymore. They had finally understood what it said. It said that humanity had meant every word. It had always only ever said exactly that. The delegation arrived on a Thursday. 5 of them. Senior council members, each one representing a different species, each one carrying the weight of an institution that had never in its 600-year history sent its people to another species station to ask for anything. They came in a ship that bore the full Harmony seal, a gold and silver circle that symbolized, in the original Accord language, the unbroken ring of mutual protection. A young Terran diplomatic aide named Sarah was the first one to see them come through the dock. She had been assigned to logistics. Her job was to confirm the berth, arrange ground transport, and make sure the conference room on level 4 had water and temperature settings appropriate for 5 different biologies. She had a checklist. She worked through it the way you work through a checklist when you are 26 years old, and the most important diplomatic event in a century is happening around you, and the only thing you can do is make sure nobody's chair is the wrong height. She confirmed the berth. She arranged the transport. She set the conference room temperature. She stood in the dock corridor and watched them walk off the ship. They were remarkable. That was the only word for it. The Velhari delegate Sevorath, who she had read about in briefing documents, but never seen, moved the way old trees moved, slow and upright, and entirely certain of their own weight. Behind them the Keth delegate was small, and quick-eyed, and walked like someone who was always aware of where the exits were. The other 3 were species Sarah recognized from photographs. None of the photographs had prepared her for the fact that they were real and standing in a corridor on a human station, and looking around at the walls with expressions she could not read. She did her job. She took them to the conference room. She made sure the water was cold. She left. Reyes did not attend the meeting. This had been decided. His presence, Yara had explained, in the short and complete way she explained things, would communicate something they were not ready to communicate yet. The military component of humanity's position was already understood. They did not need to put it in the room. He stood at a window on level 6 instead. Below him he could see the dock. The Harmony ship sat in its berth, gold seal visible on the hull, bright against the plain gray of the station structure. He watched it for a while. He was not counting anything. In the conference room, the offer was made. Sevorath spoke first, and spoke well. The voice was the same as always, measured, unhurried, built for long rooms. But the sentence structure had changed. There were fewer nested conditionals, more direct statements. As if they had spent the last 3 months practicing a different way of talking, and were using it now, carefully, one word at a time. Resolution 7 Gamma 9 would be fully reversed. Language to that effect was already drafted, and could be submitted for council vote within a week. Humanity would receive 2 additional council seats, 11 total, bringing representation closer to alignment with actual contribution. A formula had been developed for calculating seat allocation based on infrastructure participation. Humanity had been consulted on the formula. They had not been consulted on the original seat allocation. The difference was acknowledged. A formal apology would be entered into the permanent record of the Harmony Accords. Not a diplomatic apology, a direct one, naming the specific harm. Sevorath read a portion of it aloud. It was, Yara noted, a good apology. Someone had worked hard on it. There was a bowl of fruit on the conference table, local produce. Someone on the logistics team had placed it there as a small gesture of hospitality. The kind of thing you do when you want a room to feel less formal. Sevorath kept looking at it. Between points, between sentences, their eyes went back to the bowl. The fruit was orange and slightly oblong, and had a particular smell that reached across the table in the warm air of the room. Sevorath did not know what it was called. Had been in Harmony for 200 years, attended 4,000 sessions, negotiated 900 agreements, and had never once learned the name of a single Terran food. They looked at the fruit. They kept talking. But they looked at it. When the offer was complete, the room was quiet. Yara sat with the quiet for a moment. She had a glass of water in front of her, and she did not touch it. She looked at Sevorath, and then at the Keth delegate, who was watching her with an expression that was very still and very careful. "The offer is generous," she said. "The council has clearly thought carefully about what humanity would want to return." She paused. "I think that's the problem." Sevorath's face did not change, but something behind it shifted, the way a structure shifts when something underneath it moves. Yara did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She said she did not doubt the offer was real. She did not doubt that the reversal would hold, that the seats would be honored, that the apology would stand in the record exactly as written. She believed all of it. She believed Sevorath's sincerity. She believed that the council understood, now, that what had happened was a mistake. What she could not unknow, and this was the part she said slowly, not for drama, but because she wanted to be understood clearly, was that 38 species had looked at Resolution 7 Gamma 9 and seen an efficiency measure. Not a seizure. Not a theft. Not a violation of the spirit of the compact they had all signed. A reasonable adjustment. An evolution. They had voted for it the way you vote for a change in filing procedures, without ceremony, without difficulty. That was what the vote had shown her. Not malice, not hatred, something in some ways harder to answer than those things. They had not known what they were taking. 600 years of harmony, and no one had thought to count what humanity actually held until humanity started taking it back. That is the consensus of this council about what the compact means, Yara said. Then humanity does not belong inside it. Not because we are angry, because we are not the same kind of thing. The room was quiet again. The Keth delegate, small, quick-eyed, who had sent 4 sentences in the middle of the night and had not been sure anyone would answer, leaned forward. "What do you want instead?" they asked. Not as a negotiating position, as a real question. Yara looked at them for a moment. "Something honest," she said. 2 words. She did not explain them. She did not need to. Outside on level 6, Reyes turned away from the window. He could not see the conference room from there. He did not know yet what had been said. He walked back to his office, sat down at his desk, and for the first time in 4 months, did not count the ceiling tiles. He looked out the other window instead, the one that faced open space. Stars, distant and cold and completely indifferent, doing exactly what they had always done. He thought that was not such a bad thing to be. The Candor Accords were ugly. That was the first thing every diplomat who read them said, and every one of them meant it as a criticism, and not one of them was wrong. The document had no preamble about civilization. It had no language about the dream of a united galaxy, no poetry about the long arc of intelligent life bending toward cooperation, no ceremony at all. It began on the first line with the names of the parties involved, and it ended on the last line with the date and signature blocks. And everything in between was a list of specific things that specific parties would and would not do, written in language so direct that it made experienced diplomats uncomfortable, in the way that very bright light makes you uncomfortable. Not because it is wrong, but because you are not used to it. It said, here is what we will do. Here is what we will not do. Here is what happens if either of us breaks this. That was all. 18 months after the withdrawal, 11 species had signed. A further 19 months after that, the number was 19. 3 of those 19 were still technically members of the Harmony Accords. Nobody had a rule against being in both. The Candor Accords did not have a rule against anything except dishonesty. That was, as one Harmony legal analyst noted in a memo that circulated widely and was argued about for weeks, both extremely simple and extraordinarily difficult to violate without everyone immediately knowing you had done it. That was the point. Sarah, who had once been a logistics aide who counted chair heights, was now the lead negotiator on a Candor partnership with a species called the Dravathi. The Dravathi had never signed a bilateral agreement with anyone. They had been members of Harmony for 300 years, and had spent most of it being outvoted on things they cared about, and voting the way the Velhari suggested on things they did not fully understand. They had reached out through the Keth, who had become, quietly and without ceremony, the central connective tissue of the new compact. Sarah sat across from the Dravathi trade envoy in a small room on a small station, with no gold seals on the walls and a very ordinary table between them, and she walked through the agreement line by line. The envoy kept asking where the ceremony was. This part, the envoy said, pointing to a clause about response time for supply disruptions, is very specific. Yes, Sarah said. It says 48 hours. It says 48 hours. And if you do not respond in 48 hours, then the clause below it applies, and you are released from your counter-obligation for 60 days. The envoy looked at the document, then at Sarah, then at the document again. In Harmony, this type of clause takes 6 committees to discuss. I know, Sarah said. And at the end, it is usually worded so that it could mean several things. Yes. The envoy was quiet for a moment. This only means one thing. That is the goal, Sarah said. The Dravathi signed. They signed quickly, with the pen slightly shaky in their grip, the way you sign something when you are not entirely sure if you are relieved or afraid, and the feeling is so new, you have no word for it yet. Sarah walked back to her office and sent one message, which read, Dravathi on board. That's 19. She did not celebrate. She put the signed copy in the file and opened the next one. Yara saw the message at her desk. She was eating something, a takeaway container of jollof rice that had been delivered cold because she had let it sit for 2 hours. She read the message. 19. She ate the cold rice. She had been asked many times in the past 18 months why she had not taken the council's offer. The question always had a subtext, which was, you could have won inside the system. Why did you build a new one? She never fully answered it, not because she was protecting something, but because the full answer was longer than most people wanted to hear. The partial answer, which she gave when pressed, was this. The council's offer was a good offer from people who had learned a lesson. But a lesson learned after the damage is done is still a lesson that required the damage. She did not want to build the next 200 years on top of that. She wanted to build them on top of something that had not needed the damage first. That was the partial answer. The full answer was something she kept in the same part of herself where she kept the memory of placing the withdrawal document on the floor of the council chamber with both hands. The full answer was that she had spent 11 years in that room and had given everything she had to the idea that showing up and doing the work was enough. That being essential would eventually translate into being respected. That Harmony was as good as its word. She had been wrong. Not about Harmony's potential, about the distance between potential and practice. She did not regret those 11 years. She just was not going back. The message from Sevorath came on a Wednesday evening through a personal channel. Not council business, not official. The message said, "I would like to speak with you, not as a delegate. I am not sure what other capacity I have, but I would like to speak." They met on neutral ground, a small station in the corridor between Harmony and Terran space that had been built by a species that belonged to neither, and was used primarily by cargo operators who did not want to navigate customs procedures. The room they met in had scuffed floors and one working light, and a table that was too small for the conversation they were about to have. Sevorath came in and sat down without preamble. The long, pale face was quieter than Yara had ever seen it. 200 years old, moving through this moment without the armor of conditional grammar for the first time, apparently, in all of them. "I did not know what we were taking from you," Sevorath said. Each word came out as its own weight. No nesting, no conditions. "I believed the compact was the thing that mattered. I did not know there was a difference between the compact and the people in it." The room was still. "I have been trying to understand how I did not know this," Sevorath continued. "I have been trying to understand for 18 months. I attended 4,000 sessions. I helped write 600 agreements. I was in Harmony for 200 years, and I never—" They stopped, looked at the table. "I never asked," they said, "about any of it. I never asked what it cost. I assumed that because you kept coming, it was not costing anything." Yara was quiet for a moment. She thought about 11 years of sessions, about cold tea in an old thermos, about a photo of the Accra coastline she had left behind on a desk that someone had probably cleared out and thrown away, about the 43 days she had spent learning the conditional grammar of Harmony diplomacy so she could speak in a language that would be heard, and then 11 years of speaking it, and one morning when she finally said something plainly. She thought about a bowl of fruit on a conference table, about a species that came 200 years late to asking a simple question. "Now you do," she said. She reached to the side of the table where she had placed a small bag. She took out 2 cups. A thermos, not her mother's, a new one, plain and silver and unremarkable. She pushed one across the table. Sevorath looked at it. "What is it?" they asked. "Tea," Yara said. "It's hot. Drink it before it goes cold." Sevorath picked up the cup, held it. The heat of it was probably strange to them. The Velhari ran colder than humans, and hot drinks were not their way. But they held it, with both hands. The way you hold something when you are trying to understand the weight of it. They did not ask what kind of tea. They drank it. Outside, the station moved through empty space, the way small stations do. Without drama, without ceremony, just the slow and steady motion of a thing doing exactly what it was built to do. Back in Yara's office, on the edge of her desk, there was a bowl. It held the same kind of fruit that had been on the conference table 18 months ago, when a delegation had come with an offer, and Sevorath had spent the whole meeting looking at it. Someone had sent the bowl to Yara's office after the meeting. No note, no name. She had never figured out who. She had never eaten the fruit. She had never thrown it away. It sat there, orange and slightly oblong, smelling faintly of something she had no name for either. Some things, she had decided, you did not need to name to keep.